Thomas and Lily Grayson were the last people anyone in Edgewater suspected, until the day police uncovered a hidden room beneath their garage, and the truth about what they'd been doing in the dark came to light. Thomas Grayson was the kind of man people trusted without question. In the small, close-knit town of Edgewater, he had built a quiet life centered around his teenage daughter, Lily. After his wife's sudden death in a car accident 5 years earlier, Thomas never remarried. Instead, he focused entirely on raising Lily and earning an honest living at his small auto repair shop on the edge of town. His work was dependable, his bills were paid on time, and his smile never gave away the weight he carried. To neighbors and acquaintances, he was a symbol of strength, a father who put his child before everything. He attended school functions, helped organize charity car washes, and was even known to offer free repairs to elderly locals who couldn't afford to pay. People spoke highly of him, often pointing him out to their children as an example of perseverance and kindness. He waved at passing cars from his driveway, kept his lawn neatly trimmed, and never once caused any trouble. His garage lights, however, were often still glowing long after midnight. When asked, he would simply say he was finishing up extra work. No one questioned him. He was just that kind of man. Thomas's daughter, Lily, was quiet like him. Polite, soft-spoken, and a bit withdrawn since her mother's death. She spent most of her time reading or working on art projects in her room. Occasionally, she'd be seen riding her bike to the library or helping her father organize tools in the garage. They seemed to share a deep bond built on unspoken understanding. People respected that. Grief had brought them close, and though neither spoke much about the past, it was clear they had found a way to move forward. Thomas never seemed particularly interested in the cases. He would nod solemnly when people spoke about the missing kids, but rarely added anything. He focused on work, on Lily, and on his quiet routine. If anyone noticed the extra locks on his garage door, or the heavy-duty freezer he had delivered one winter evening, they didn't mention it. If they heard strange noises late at night, they assumed it was just the sounds of tools or machinery. In a town full of familiar faces, the idea that something terrible could be hiding in plain sight was unthinkable. But sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who look just like everyone else. Sometimes, the ones who seem safest are the ones with the darkest secrets. When officers arrived and forced open the rusted lock, they were struck by the eerie quiet. The cabin was small but carefully arranged, with 3 sleeping bags laid out side by side, all perfectly clean. On a shelf were rows of canned food, some only recently purchased based on the expiration dates. A portable heater, batteries, and a small generator filled the air with the faint scent of gasoline. But it was the wooden chest in the corner that changed everything. It was bolted to the floor, heavy, and padlocked twice over. Once opened, it revealed an unsettling collection. Multiple spiral-bound journals, meticulously labeled and arranged by date. The contents were disturbing. Each journal chronicled a series of observations, daily notes on habits, movements, personalities of 3 teenagers. All 3 had gone missing in Edgewater over the past 2 years. Each journal began with the teen's name and ended with a final entry that simply read, "Complete." The writing was neat, almost obsessive, with diagrams, sketches, and detailed surveillance notes. The author described following the teens, learning their routines, and gradually isolating them from their friends and families. The pages were filled with questions like, what does fear do to trust? And at what point does the mind break? Each book painted a portrait of someone who saw people not as individuals, but as subjects in a twisted experiment. When the contents were processed, forensic teams found something unexpected: a partial fingerprint on the inside cover of one journal. It was smudged but clear enough to yield results. The print didn't match any known criminal databases, but it did match someone local. It matched Lily Grayson, Thomas's daughter. Investigators were stunned. How had her fingerprint ended up in a cabin so deeply tied to the missing persons cases? She was never suspected, never even considered a person of interest. She had no known connection to any of the missing teens. The discovery raised a flood of questions. Was she a victim, a witness, or something else? The police brought Lily in for questioning. She appeared genuinely confused, insisting she had never been in the woods, much less the cabin. Her father, too, seemed surprised when he was informed of the discovery. He claimed they'd never been hiking, never camped, and had no reason to be in that part of town. His calm reaction didn't sit right with investigators, who began to feel the first stirrings of unease. Something was clearly being hidden, and the cabin was only the beginning. As suspicion settled over the Grayson household, investigators began digging into Thomas's past. On the surface, his life appeared clean and straightforward. An unassuming man who had endured personal tragedy and devoted himself to his daughter. But as detectives sifted through records, inconsistencies began to surface. Small at first, but enough to warrant a closer look. One of the first red flags came from the accident that killed his wife, Angela Grayson. Officially ruled a loss of vehicle control due to slick roads, the case had been closed years ago without deeper examination. But now, with new attention on the family, the file was reopened. A forensic analyst reviewed the old report and noticed something odd. The brake line had failed in a way inconsistent with corrosion or wear. It had been cut, cleanly, deliberately. At the time, it was dismissed as damage from the crash itself, but under a sharper lens, it looked more like sabotage. A deeper dive into insurance records revealed that Angela S. life insurance had been updated just weeks before her death. Doubled, in fact. Thomas had been the sole beneficiary. It painted a picture of someone more calculating than he let on. Investigators started to believe the cabin, the journals, the disappearances. None of it was random. Thomas had built an image of trustworthiness over years, shielding himself behind the facade of a grieving husband and devoted father. But behind closed doors, it seemed he had been crafting a much darker legacy. Armed with a warrant, police searched the Grayson property. What they found beneath the garage stunned even the most seasoned officers. Hidden behind a false wall was a narrow stairwell leading down to a small, windowless room. Inside was a table stained with chemical residue, shelves filled with labeled containers, and a locked freezer humming softly in the corner. When they opened it, they found sealed bags of clothing, some matching what the missing teens were last seen wearing. DNA analysis would later confirm the worst. Also hidden beneath the garage floorboards was a final journal, identical in style to the ones found in the cabin. It contained more detailed notes, timelines, and plans. The last few entries were particularly chilling. They spoke about control, about observing human behavior under stress, and about something referred to only as the transformation. One line stood out: "The experiment is almost complete. One more subject remains." Experts confirmed the handwriting matched the cabin journals. This was Thomas's private archive, the blueprint of his hidden world. It revealed a man who saw himself not as a killer, but as an observer, a kind of amateur scientist studying fear and survival. It wasn't rage or revenge that drove him. It was curiosity. The most disturbing revelation came in the form of a note found folded into one of the final pages. It read, "She's ready now. She understands." Investigators weren't sure at first who "she" referred to until they looked at Lily. The implications were horrifying. If the note was true, the crimes hadn't ended. They had only just begun to evolve. Lily Grayson was placed under protective supervision after the shocking discoveries beneath her home. Authorities were unsure whether she had been a victim, a bystander, or something far more complex. At just 17, she had spent the majority of her life under the care of a father who now appeared to be a serial predator, hiding atrocities beneath a calm exterior. The question no one could answer yet was how much she knew, and what role she might have played in his secret life. Psychological evaluators were brought in to assess her condition. Lily was quiet, composed, and showed little emotion during interviews. She claimed to have no memory of the cabin, the journals, or anything unusual in her father's behavior. But there were subtle details that raised concern. She didn't ask about the missing teens. She didn't seem shocked about the evidence found under the garage. In fact, she seemed more focused on mundane topics: schoolwork, her cat, what books she could read while in custody. Meanwhile, forensic teams examined the journals in greater detail. In the final notebook recovered beneath the garage, the last dozen entries stood out from the rest. The tone had shifted. The writing style, while similar, showed slight differences in pressure and rhythm. Specialists determined that the last entries were not penned by Thomas. They were written by someone else, someone younger, less experienced. The handwriting analysis suggested they were Lily's. This discovery flipped the investigation on its head. Not only had Lily possibly known about her father's crimes, but she may have continued them after he stopped. When cross-referenced with the timeline of the third teen's disappearance, it was revealed that the final journal entries which described the last victim in chilling detail had been written after Thomas had suffered a hand injury that prevented him from writing at all. The implication was clear. Lily had taken over the documentation of the abductions. She had not only known what her father was doing, she had participated. More evidence began to mount. On Lily's laptop, investigators found encrypted files that were eventually cracked. Inside were scanned copies of the original journals, meticulously organized and annotated with personal reflections. In one note, Lily had written, "I see why he did it. When you remove the noise, people show their real faces. Fear reveals everything." She had studied her father's work not like a traumatized daughter, but like a student absorbing a lesson. Security footage from a gas station 2 miles from the cabin showed Lily alone, purchasing fuel and supplies the day before the third teen vanished. The timestamp matched the first entry of that teen's journal. The last pages of that notebook were void of her father's usual cold detachment. Instead, the words hinted at fascination, almost admiration for the subject's resilience. It wasn't just about control anymore. It was about connection. Twisted, dangerous connection. The investigators were no longer just looking at a father's crimes. They were unraveling the evolution of something even more disturbing, a legacy being passed on. Lily hadn't turned her father in when she learned the truth. She had embraced it.